Okay, I hope you can hear me. Welcome to our second webinar here for Nordic Plastic Association. My name is Magnus Hedenmark. I am the president for this organization, and I have the pleasure to have two well-known speakers here today. John Warner, the founder of Green Chemistry, and Anders Wijkman with a long experience in politics and organizations always related to sustainability, and he's very well known in the debate. I just want to inform you about about questions and so on. You can write down your questions in the chat, and I will bring them up as much as I can after the speakers have had their sessions, and I will see if I can do that. I will have John for about 20 minutes, and then this short break, and then Anders another 20 minutes. So let's see if we can have also kind of interesting discussion between us three with your questions as well. So I will say to John, welcome up and have your speak, please.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a bit early in the morning. I'm in Boston, US, and it's 4 a.m. So if I look a little funny, I apologize. But I actually have been up for a little bit. I am just going to verify that I am sharing my slides correctly. You can see them. Yes. All good. Can you see my slides?
We do.
Good, great. All right. Well, thank you. I want to start by, a disclaimer that I approached this presentation from the perspective of being a chemistry, material science, polymer inventor. And so I have been working in this field for nearly 40 years, but I'm approaching it from the perspective of someone in the lab who's inventing molecules and asking the question from that perspective. Now, I like to give a disclaimer that I don't claim to have all the correct answers in the world. I am going to, with a bit of vulnerability, share with you the way I see things. But please, if it sounds like I'm very presumptuous saying you must believe this, you must believe this, that's not where I'm coming from. This is just what has been working for me for many, many years, and I will share it with you. My perspective is, let's imagine if tomorrow morning everyone in the world embraced sustainability. Every person, every store or retail, every manufacturer, every brand just said, yes, we want it. I believe we're in trouble because only about 10% of the technologies are truly sustainable. There's a few more emerging, but it is my position that today in 2026, 85% of the technologies have not been invented yet. It's not that people are choosing to not use them. We chemists, we scientists have not invented them. So the biggest barrier, and one of the biggest barriers, in my opinion, is not so much desire as it is ability. And so we always talk about the circular economy, which I think is a wonderful metaphor for what I call the materials ecology: manufacturing, distribution, use, collection, recycling. But the
Mhm.
problem is, if you accept my premise that we need to invent solutions, then it becomes a problem with the circular metaphor because a loop keeps things in, but it also keeps things out. And if we need invention, we must be careful about our metaphors to be preventing that. So what I do is I change and I superimpose what I call the intellectual ecology. So we have the circulation of materials, but we also have to look at the circulation of ideas. And so I put a twist in it and I make it a Mobius strip and I superimpose basic research, applied research, development, scale up. And so we need the people who are inventing materials and the people who are manufacturing materials to be more closer together. And unfortunately, in my opinion, over the decades, we've actually separated quite a bit, making this a far more difficult proposition. The way I look at it, we take natural resources and we extract simple materials. Then we take these simple materials, like ores and petroleum and agricultural products, and we do chemistry. And we synthesize more complicated materials, do many, many chemical steps. Then we stop doing chemistry and we just put things together and we manufacture products. Now, if we can manufacture products and keep them in use and reuse, that is the highest form of sustainability. If I use a product that my grandparents used and my grandchildren continue to use that, unfortunately, many products do not survive very long. And so then we must do the mechanical recycling, disassemble the manufacturing process back to complicated materials. Then we must take the complicated materials and sometimes reverse chemistry, and what I call molecular reprocess back to the simpler materials. And then finally, where appropriate, we need the materials to degrade back to natural resources, what I call the regeneration process, so that we can maintain stable ecosystems. And for me, this is a pendulum in which going clockwise is the human-built world, and going anti-clockwise is the natural world. And not everything goes all the way full back and forth, but where appropriate, you go in the different loops. But this overlap on the bottom is an elegant way of assessing sustainability and looking at the impact on the human-built world on that natural world. Now, it's impossible to have zero impact, so we have to do our best to minimize that impact and be supportive of the ecosystem. But so, for example, for my regeneration going from simple materials to natural resources, imagine if we took petroleum and agriculture and all the different natural resources and we made all the many, many materials. And then after use, we allowed them to degrade back to water, ammonia, and carbon dioxide so that we could have this bioeconomy. Right now, today, maybe 92% of all materials in commerce do not biodegrade. We could one day invent materials that all biodegrade, but today very few do. Doesn't mean we couldn't in the future, but we must acknowledge today most don't. Now, if we look at the materials metabolism, this is where I spend most of my science. This is where in my lab I dream of this. So let's imagine that we were out and we were having dinner. We had some nice bread, some nice cheese, a nice glass of red wine. What is happening in our body when we eat food? When we eat food, in our cells, in our body, we break proteins to amino acids. We break carbohydrates to sugars. We break liquids into fatty acids. But that's not all. Exactly as we're sitting at a table eating, in our cells at the same time, we're growing hair, we're growing fingernails, we're growing blood cells. Nature uniquely does not separate the assembly and the disassembly at the molecular level. This is where we humans have not even begun to do this. Today, we go to one building and they're recycling a material. And we go to another building and they're manufacturing a material. That is completely unnatural from how evolution has done it. The day we go to a building and we're confused and we can't quite tell, are they recycling or are they manufacturing? When that happens, we're truly sustainable because it's important that in the body, the decoupling and the coupling of materials happens because the energetics are combined. We have this molecule called ATP, and when we break a molecule, it gives off energy, and we put phosphate groups together. That's our molecular battery. When we need that energy, we take that phosphate group off. So that's why nature can work at such a lower energy input because every time it breaks a molecule, it harnesses that energy. Every time it builds a molecule, it uses that harnessed energy to minimize the external energy. We have done nothing in this direction. We spend all of our time, one group of people separate from another, talk about making things, and then an entirely different group of people talk about recycling things. And until we put them together, which we have a long way to go, but someday, we can do this if we focus. And then finally, when we look at the circular economy, specifically the cycle mechanical recycle, right now, most materials have not been invented to do this. We spent 200 years of modern chemistry learning how to put things together. We're just starting to think of how we disassemble it. So most multi-layer products, we want to separate the multi-layers together and so then we can put them back together. Today in 2026, we don't really know how to do this well. There's a couple examples here and there. Even something as simple as paper. Every time we recycle paper, we've been recycling paper for years, but every time we pulp paper, we break the fibers and we lower the mechanical properties. And so we can only do it a few times without other added inputs that make it more difficult. So today, we don't know how to do this well enough, but it doesn't mean we couldn't do it someday. All right. And so for me, that's not the whole story. Then we have to worry about all the emissions, the toxicity, the waste that's happening here. So imagine if we could then capture all the emissions, capture all the waste, reduce or eliminate the toxicity. Again, we've just been talking about this for maybe 20 years. We still haven't invented these technologies. So in my opinion, for us to hit a sustainable future, there's a lot people have to do about behavior, about consumption, about policies. But in my opinion, the missing component, we need a lot more scientists and engineers and chemists to figure out how to invent the technologies so this policies, so these things actually have something to be efficient with. And this is why way back in the 1990s, my friend Paul Anastas and we felt the world needed a mechanistic science. Speak the language of the chemist, of the engineer, and say, if we want to make sustainable materials, and so what do sciences have? They have journals and textbooks and classes and conferences and workshops. And that is the birth of the field of green chemistry. So this book came out in 1998. It's got a very specific definition. There's no ambiguity. What is green chemistry? It's in the book. There's a definition. It's the utilization of a set of principles that reduce or eliminate the use or generation of hazardous substances in the design, manufacture, and application of chemical products. It's not the desire. It's the mechanistic science of how to do this. And there are 12 principles, and these 12 principles are the most important part. You will not see climate change mentioned. You will not see plastics in the environment. You will not see, PFAS, because this is a mechanistic science of how one addresses the problems. So we don't have to keep writing a new principle every time a new issue comes, because this is the science that underpins how molecules work so that we can anticipate that. Now, I have been so honored. It's just been an amazing world. This book has been translated into over 15 different languages. At last count, I've been to 93 countries, meeting kings and queens and presidents and prime ministers. In fact, I had a meeting with your president in Sweden 2 years ago. But I'm just a name on a book. I'm just a convenient figurehead. There are thousands of people in the world that are doing this. And it's an honor for me to be the figurehead that gets to represent. But please understand, I'm representing a community of many, many, people that have been doing this for a very long time. But for us to accomplish change in our society, we do need people working on policies. We need people to work on behavior and actually get people to desire sustainable materials and be willing to change their lifestyle to do better for human health and the environment. But then on the other side, we need scientists to make technologies that are intrinsically safer and sustainable for humans and the environment. Okay? But that's not enough. People aren't going to use products that don't work. So that inventor still has to make excellent performance. And we can't do this just for wealthy people. That's part of our problem. It has to be affordable. So who is the only person who can make a technology have excellent performance, excellent cost, and oh, by the way, also be sustainable? The inventor. And so my focus is to make sure that inventors have these tools. And you will be shocked to find if you look at the curriculum, look, there are in the world, we graduate 450,000 people get undergraduate degrees in chemistry. 125,000 people get master's degrees. About 35,000 get doctorates. And less than 5% of them ever learn anything about what makes a molecule toxic, what makes a molecule compatible in ecosystems. This isn't a battle of good and evil. It's a strange thing that the field of chemistry has evolved absent of these materials. And so we need to figure out, how do we invent? Now, this is a little bit of a silly metaphor, but it's really important to me that people understand. In 1990, 12% of invested R&D made its way to commercial product. In 2026, we're below 2%. We as a society are not doing as good of a job getting new material products to market. We're good with making computer programs and things like that, but materials, things that you can touch, we have deteriorated our efficiency. And so we need to really look at, how is that done? And the way that I explain it is, there's a land of molecules and materials, and far, far away, there is a land of products. And they're very far away, and there's clouds and mist in between it. And so people have been really having a hard time over the decades. Someone makes a new material and they say, let's make a product, but it's too far away. Someone who's making a product wants a new material, but it's too far away. These lands don't even speak the same language. But what I have discovered in my 40 years of doing is, if you blow away the mist, you find that there's actually three islands in between. They're called the islands of innovation. And what I mean by that is, a product can be defined by a material property. I'm not going to go into the details. This isn't a chemistry lecture, but you don't have to be a scientist. You just list, I want it to be blue. I want it to be stretchy. Still not a molecule. A property is defined by a material mechanism, kind of what engineering does. Things that engineering talk about, Young's modulus, elongation at break, things like that. Still not a molecule. But a material mechanism is constituted from a molecular mechanism. Now, that's what molecules do. So now you can look at a material and, through these transitions, make a product. Or you can look at a product and say, oh, I need to fix this, and go in that direction to look at the materials. This allows us to do it. And if you want a sustainable product, you put it on the list. But if the inventor doesn't understand the mechanisms of toxicity, the mechanisms of biodegradation, how in the world can they possibly invent a sustainable product? All right. And so we could use this to invent the next Apple product. But I feel the most important ingredient to creating new products is humility. We need to realize we humans have been doing chemistry for 200, 250 years, depending how you add it. Nature has been doing chemistry for 3.8 billion years. Maybe we scientists have to have a little humility. We chemists, we material science and engineers, and instead of making an Apple product, look at a real Apple product and ask ourselves, how did nature create the water barrier? How did nature create the oxygen barrier? How did nature create the viscosity? And with a little bit of humility, if we learn from nature, we can reinvent products that are from the bioeconomy, that are biomaterials. But we need to look not just at the materials, but at what the materials do at the molecular level. And so I have been at this since 2007. I started a lab called Technology Greenhouse. I have an amazing group of people. But my point here, we're not special. We're not some amazing, brilliant people, and we certainly haven't received much funding. Okay, so with a very small amount of funding, okay, very small amount of funding, in a tiny group of people in a very small lab, in the last 15 years, we have filed over 370 patents. We have invented technology for over 100 companies. I never name a company that I work with. These companies have issued press releases saying, oh, we worked with John Warner, so I can put them up. The point is industry gets it. They just don't know how. And we've created new technologies. We have a pharmaceutical company, so this is a company we spun out. We have a cosmetic company with a hair color technology. We have an asphalt paving technology. We have a solar energy photovoltaic technology, a services company, a biopolymers company, a water harvesting company, a flow reactor company, and a pharmaceutical services company. So these are all inventions that have been derived using the principles of green chemistry in that mechanistic theory. And so when people say, oh, it's so hard to get a product to market, we don't have time to add green chemistry, they're missing the point. If some silly person like me can have hundreds of patents with hundreds of inventions, it's not in spite of sustainability and green chemistry. It is an accelerant to time to market because most products fail because the inventors did not anticipate the regulatory framework, the NGO community, and all the problems of scale up. So if you take a commercial product and you subtract the academic publications that define that commercial product, the remainder is green chemistry. And so if all you want to do is publish papers in journals, well, maybe you don't need green chemistry. But if you want people to use this science and make new products, green chemistry is that essential conversion. But what keeps me awake at night and what still concerns me is that we still have so long to go. All right. Who is going to be able to invent this? If universities do not teach this, we still teach chemistry the way we taught chemistry in 1975. So if you look at the courses that most universities are teaching, then they haven't adapted. And so my hero, the person who I feel one of the people that is working the hardest to change the world is my wife, Dr. Amy Cannon. She runs a nonprofit called Beyond Benign. And Beyond Benign has a program called the Green Chemistry Commitment, where she's asking colleges and universities around the world to agree that they will change their curriculum to bring green chemistry not as an elective, not as an option, but as a fundamental part of the curriculum. Not going to snap their fingers and do it overnight, but work to doing that. And there are now, this is out of date, there's 290 colleges and universities now have signed the green chemistry commitment. And Stockholm University, interestingly, is one of the early signers of this program. And so I'm super optimistic that, that we're going to get to where we need to be. Now you can say to me, but John, you're a chemist. What about people who aren't chemists? And I feel this is one of, Donella Meadow, the beginning of the Club of Rome system thinking. We need to really step back and realize, what do we mean by who is a chemist? Chemistry is the underpinning of biology. Biology is the underpinning of neuroscience. Neuroscience is the underpinning of philosophy. Philosophy is the underpinning of mathematics. Mathematics is the underpinning of physics, and physics is the underpinning of chemistry. There are no little buckets. The universities create these little buckets, but everyone is on this map. We've got politicians over here, historians over here, artists, musicians. What's getting in the way of sustainability is this need to have our little buckets. And if we blur those lines and get rid of the buckets, then sustainability is just a natural consequence. So I hope that this is useful for you to see a very, very quick summary of where I feel if we're going to move to a sustainable bioeconomy, it's about relearning how to invent products. There's people saying there's a lot of people explaining why we need sustainability. There's a lot of people telling us what we should do, how we should measure it, how we should report it, how we should characterize it. But perhaps the thing that, in my opinion, is being underlooked is we got the why, we've got the what, but we need the how. We need to be teaching people how to do this. Looking at examples doesn't teach people how. I want to play the violin. I can watch people play the violin. You can yell at me and tell me you must play the violin. Maybe pass a law saying all John Wanners must play the violin. But if I don't have a teacher teaching me how, I'm never going to do it very well. And so to me, changing the way we teach and do chemistry is what is a critical part of a very complex problem. So I hope that this was useful for you to see my perspective. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thank you, John, very much for your presentation. It's a pleasure to see one that is so very passionate about what you're working with.
At 4 in the morning.
Yeah, yeah, and it's still in the morning, 4 in the morning, you
Without
wake
I,
up and
I
do
haven't
it.
had my coffee yet. Yes.
But I think it wakes up a lot of kind of questions in my head and so on. And I was thinking about you were talking maybe a little bit more about system thinking than
Hmm.
just focusing on the materials,
Hmm.
because without a context,
Hmm.
you can't solve anything. You don't understand
Yeah.
where in what system are you working with this material. For example, bioplastics. It must be
Yeah.
taken care in a kind of system
And,
with the composting or whatsoever. So,
and that's exactly the point, Magnus, is that again, we're not going to solve all problems through technology and invention. I
yeah,
realize this is a much more complicated problem than that, but we must acknowledge the people who invented the cell phone.
yeah,
They said it needs to have computational power. They said it must use energy to do this. It must have a good display. It must do this. And it had a list of all
yeah,
the things it must do. But if
mm,
you go back and you get into that design room
yeah,
and you look at these brilliant scientists that were creating this product, I bet you nobody put on the list. It should
mm,
be recyclable. It should be non-toxic.
yeah,
It should be sensitive. So if people had it on the list as part of the system, they would do it. But for some strange reason, the history of chemistry, we chemists never embraced impact on humans or the environment as self-definitional. So
mm,
if we didn't take it, who did we give it to?
mm,
And so if we take that as part of our responsibility, it'll take time to learn, but we need another generation of invention before we declare failure, because
yeah.
this is a new inspiration in the field of chemistry and material science. And I have optimism. We're not going to solve every problem, but I
I,
think we can solve a lot.
Okay, John, it's very nice. I hope you stay with us so we can have
Mhm.
some more questions to you. And
Yes.
and I know you have some opinions about how the European Union is working with regulation and so on. And you can develop it more after Anders have had his presentation, I think. But I must spontaneously say that I also feel a bit a kind of sorrow in my heart when I see what a waste with people studying chemistry without going into the most central thing that you should understand actually for being a good chemist. But we come back to that. And
Yes.
now I will go over to Anders. Anders is, of course, not an expert in chemistry or plastics or things like that. But Anders is a generalist and a very committed opinion leader, and he understands system thinking, and that is the most important thing. And you have big experience of public procurement. So, Anders, I'm a little bit excited to listen to your entrance to this. Welcome.
Okay. Thank you very much. And thank you, John. It's always a delight to listen to you. I learn something every time. And when you refer towards the end to the whole problem of how chemists are being educated, this is not the only area where education is lacking precision. Look at how economists are being educated. I mean, it's the same type of pattern or problem. I mean, we still have an economic model, the prevailing one all over the world, neoclassical or neoliberal or whatever we call it. And it leaves the biosphere outside. Anything that happens to nature, natural systems, to the atmosphere, etc., is looked upon as external factors. And yet we cannot do anything without access to nature and natural materials and to ecosystem services. And this model may have been the right one or natural some 150 years ago when the economic model was being developed, because at that time we were 1.5 billion people and nature looked abandoned. And the scarce factors at that time were technology, innovation, skilled labor, financial capital, etc. So I can understand how that developed, but to have the same model today, it's just insane in my opinion. And I don't understand why conventional economists haven't done more to transform. And it's exactly the same in the area of chemistry. And you underline that chemists really don't learn during their education about the likely effects on what they're doing on nature or on health. And yet those should be the starting points. So thank you for that. You also talked a lot about the complexity of materials and the fact that most of the materials that we have in the market are not sustainable. They still have to be invented. And I think that offers a lot of hope for the future. Because at the same time, we know that the materials we use today are causing a lot of problems. Toxicity is one thing, but if you look at the climate problem, an ecosystem decline, I'm a member of the International Resource Panel, which is one of those UN-based scientific panels. We did a study 2 years ago called Global Resources Outlook 2024, and we came to the conclusion that the extraction and processing of different types of materials make up more or less 60% of greenhouse gas emissions. And what kind of materials do I talk about? Well, of course, food production is one, but then you have steel, you have concrete, you have ammonia, you have aluminum, you have textiles, you have plastics, electronics, chemicals of different types, etc. So 60% of greenhouse gas emissions are directly linked or connected with material extraction and processing. And then you end up in the marketplace with products. And it's the same with ecosystem decline and biodiversity loss. So here we really have a huge problem. And people who believe that the only thing we have to do is stop burning fossil fuels, they don't really understand the challenge. Unless we start with material demand, material consumption, and understand that that's the main driver, we will not be able to solve the problem. Take green steel, for instance. The emissions connected with steel production, 7-8% of the total greenhouse gas emissions, is of course related to the processing, and when you use coal and coke in the process, and you generate a lot of carbon emissions. And now there is this hope to move from conventional steel production to green steel production. In Sweden, we have two big companies. One is Stegra and the other one is SAB. And I think they're going to solve it, or at least I hope. But it has taken a long time to get to where they are. Maybe 10, 15 years, and now 5 years until completion. But we produce 5 million tons of steel in Sweden. The world production is 2,000 million tons. So you can imagine how long time it will take for that particular material to become green, so to say. So we have a huge problem with today's materials. And then you could add to that security of supply. And we have been reminded about that in the present crisis around the Hormuz. And it's not only oil products and liquefied gas that is not being transported. You have all kinds of materials that are blocked. So we have many challenges with regard to materials, and we are so dependent on fossil materials, and not only for the energy sector, but for all kinds of industrial sectors. Pharmaceuticals, chemicals, textiles, of course, agriculture, and you name it. And in all these areas, we are now experiencing what the dependence on a few regions in the world means. So obviously we have to transform our economy from the point of view of security of supply, but also from the point of view of the climate and the environment. A lot of work is going on in the EU. Climate policy has been newly reformed. 90% of the emissions should disappear until 2040. And that means that all major climate policies have to be updated. You have the Circular Economy Act around the corner, where the attempt will be made to really make resource efficiency happen. But there is a lot of hang-ups around the circularity. And most people don't really understand what a circular economy is. And also most people don't understand that to just become more productive in the way you use materials is not necessarily the solution, because you will experience a lot of rebound effects. When you make a system more productive, you free up resources that can be used to demand resources somewhere else. And that's exactly what has been happening and is happening. By the way, economic growth, that's the way economic growth happens. Productivity increases, you free up resources, and you can expand. So the Circular Economy Act has to deal with all these aspects, and we'll see what happens. Then you have, which I saw this morning as a matter of fact, a new consultation on biotechnology, and there plastics comes in, and there biomaterials as alternative to fossil-based materials comes in. Then you have a new directive on green public procurement, on packaging, and on plastics. And as you said, Magnus, I'm not an expert on plastics, far from it. But I have observed over the years that the conventional plastics industry has been effective in preventing bioplastics from being recognized as an alternative. And one of the arguments has been all the time that no, we are going to solve the problem with plastic pollution by recycling. And we know it doesn't really work. Of course, you can recycle some of the plastics, but most of it is not being recycled. And by definition, it's going to be very difficult to recycle. So, of course, we need alternatives. I think that bioplastics stand out as a very good opportunity. But there's a lot of policy measures that will be required. We know, for instance, that in Italy, bioplastics has had quite a success. The company of Novamont has produced a lot of bio-based plastics, and they have also made the recycling work by industrial composting. And it's somehow a mystery to me that the rest of Europe has not really caught on to that and understood the importance of it. Instead, the conventional plastics industry has sort of interfered and made the point that there is going to be a problem if you have fossil-based and bio-based plastics at the same time. They will contaminate each other, blah, blah, blah. But in Italy, it seems to work, and it works pretty well. And as I understand it, you can mix up to 20% of bio-based materials into conventional plastics. So I'm just wondering why so little has been happening. Public procurement is probably one of the answers because it's a very important tool for a society to drive change in the right direction. And when I look at this biotech consultation paper that you will find, Magnus, on the web, on the European Commission website this morning, it specifically says it aims at enhancing European Union competition in industrial biotech and biomanufacturing, promoting EU-based sustainable production of chemicals and other materials, in particular plastics and polymers, fibers, fabrics and textiles, construction products, fertilizers, etc., etc. So to me, seems as there is an opportunity right now, both in relation to the climate policy, to the Circular Economy Act, but also to the biotech consultation, to really push for inventions in this area and to push for a greater role being given bio-based materials in the area of plastics. So I will stop there. I think this is an exciting area, and I think given what John said, if we could help put a lot of focus on the role of invention and the role of education of chemists in this process, I think wonders could happen. It would, of course, take time, but I think the examples that John gave from many different branches of the economy, asphalt, pharmaceuticals, etc., there are enormous opportunities to invent and design products that are benign, totally benign for nature and for humans. Thank you.
Thank you, Anders, for this speak. And I agree with you that the new bioeconomic strategy is very interesting because it looks like the European Union has realized at least that we have not really been so good at promoting the right way of development regarding bioplastics, etc. And we have some, I can also say we have some bureaucratic and misleading regulations, starting with the details before we understand where we are going to with all this kind of regulation. It start with details, and that's I think it's a problem. But I
And
also want to hear.
probably, Magnus, even if the war in Iran, the bombardment there, etc., I mean, we have reason to be very critical of what the US and Israel did. But this blockage of Hormuz will force us to rethink, simply from the point of view of security of supply and not being so dependent on the outside world and on fossil-based materials. So that is probably going to be a stronger argument than everything related to climate and environment. And I think we should look at all these aspects at the same time.
Yeah, the Hormuz just gave us the picture of what unsustainability is about. It's just happened with the Hormuz, but was only a question of time before we got in tricky situations anyhow. So this is also an opportunity to rethink and grab it. But I also want to ask you, you have experience in public procurement and see how can the public procurement put right demands. I think we have some issues within the bioplastic. You mentioned Novamont is a very serious company, but they succeed in North Italy because they are taking things from the bottom and know what they are doing. But for example, if you have not the materials is not really made for composting, but it's stated biodegradable. It destroys the market. So I hope there can be some kind of demands that say, okay, this is compostable, but it's certified. Do you think the public procurement can help us to shape up the demands for helping up the development of bioplastic?
Absolutely. I honestly think so. As a matter of fact, I was leading a Swedish inquiry into public procurement that was in 2012, 2013. And at that time, we had to be much more cautious in almost every area. We were, for instance, advocating that environment concerns may be taken into account, not shall be taken into account. We couldn't go further at that time. And now the situation has changed and we have lost a lot of time. So now I think that it's all upon us to push public procurement in the right direction. And there's going to be a new directive. So I hope we can, in the consultation, make the right points and convince the Commission to do the right thing. But be mindful of the fact that the conventional plastics industry and the fossil-based companies, they are very strong lobbyists, very strong lobbyists.
I also want to ask John, you also have do you have some also opinions about the regulation and policy world of Europe? What have you observed from the other side of Atlantic from your point of view?
Well, just in general, as a chemist, the worst material to design an economy on would be a petroleum hydrocarbon. As a chemist, it has no functionality. The word hydrocarbon means hydrogen and carbon. It is a very boring molecule. So what we must do is in chemistry, we must add hydroxy groups, we must add amides, we must add esters and create these complicated molecules. Now, of course, where did the fossil materials come from? 100 million years ago, they were biomaterials. They were buried in the ground and fossilized, turned into hydrocarbons, and then we return it back. There's nothing magical about hydrocarbons other than the government subsidies in the invention of products. There are trillions and trillions of US dollars over the last 80 years have been singularly focused to turn hydrocarbons into pharmaceuticals, into textiles, into everything. And if we went back and applied that same amount of money on lignin or cellulose or seaweed or human hair for that matter, that kind of money could make products out of anything. It's not the magic of the molecules. It's nearly a century of trillions of government subsidies going into that. So sometimes we say, oh, but they're so magical, they're so important. They are magical and important because humans allocated the resources to make it so. And so sometimes we forget that and we think there's something magical about the materials. The magic was in the investment and how the investment happens. What I see as the biggest issue is the enemy of the excellent is the perfect, and the perfect doesn't exist. Every time a company has something that improves, people say, there's 1,000 people in, but what about this? What
Yeah.
about this? And we destroy every success because it's not good enough. And so essentially what we're doing is we're supporting the status quo because anything that improves above the status quo, if we just criticize, well, it's still not good enough, we are inadvertently supporting what we already have. So we must realize that the easiest thing in the world is to identify how a technology still isn't quite perfect. That will always happen. And if that is what we seek, then we're literally saying, let's just keep doing what we're doing. Because if anyone tries to invest, all we're going to do is attack them and tell them it's not good enough. So we need to come with a psychology that the way science works is if one person makes something biodegradable, then someone else reduces the energy use, and then someone else contributes to some other component, as Anders said, of all the different global issues. But to think someone's going to come in and solve all the problems at once, that's never going to happen. So we
Mm.
need to, instead of measure the distance from perfect down, we should be measuring from where we are up. People
Mm.
talk about biomaterials still taking a couple years to biodegrade in the environment. Well,
Yeah.
petroleum takes 800 years or more. So just because something takes a few years, that's a lot better than 800. So we need to be looking at the imp and then just never be happy. Always work harder and harder and
Yeah.
harder. But we got to celebrate. We got to tell the market, if you do this, you will be rewarded so that they do more and then they do more. But if we just criticize nothing from being good enough, we're going to be
Yeah.
where we are for the rest of time.
I can recognize that kind of how people are resonating very much, and you have to understand that you develop things, and the most important is that you realize that you have what is the purpose of everything, that you
Mhm.
understand that, because my impression from the debate here in the Nordic countries is that recycling we do recycling because the cause of recycling. They don't have figure out what is the purpose of everything. What's the idea of recycling if you don't stop, for example, regarding plastics, if you don't have the idea of stop extracting fossils. Otherwise, you shouldn't do it. Otherwise, you only increase the turnover of plastic in
Mhm.
the society with the
Mhm.
fossils and recycled stuff.
Mhm.
And I don't understand why people. And another argument that both of you maybe can comment is that almost say, oh, why don't we use industrial composting materials? Because there's a lot of compostable PLA, for example, is
Mhm.
perfect for compostable industrial composting. They say, oh, that's because we don't have systems for that in Sweden.
Yeah.
Uh, so it stops there.
Yeah.
And then is, as you say, of course, you have to develop systems
Mhm.
and take start it from somewhere. But if you say, oh, that's not the situation, so we
And
we give
that's
up from the
that's
beginning.
that's extremely important, Magnus, is that when we set metrics, when we want to create policy, we usually base that on what we know today.
Mm.
So if we define the world and create a set of metrics, by what we know today, we will create this system. But I feel 90% of the technologies haven't been invented yet. So if our policies define a space that exists today and someone has an invention that doesn't fit in that space, it won't be supported, it won't be helped. So we must understand that in our intention to do good, to create and define what we want, we can accidentally inhibit the very inventions that we need. And so we need policy, but we need to realize that we're not smart enough yet to know how to define what we want the world to be because we haven't invented that. So we have to work together. And to me, the best thing in the world, the easiest thing in the world is to tell people, don't do this, don't do this. The most powerful thing is to say, do this instead. And so if we can invent alternatives, but people think that it's just the alternatives already exist. And if we create policy, we'll force people to use the. But in my opinion, 90% of the alternatives haven't been invented. Doesn't matter all the laws, all the policy, but if we could have lined up all these alternatives and policies supported the adoption of these invented technologies, it'll work. But if we have the policy go ahead of the possibility, then companies just going to say this policy is impossible. And if they're correct, that stops everything. So we need to make the impossible possible, then regulate it.
Yeah.
You made a comment in your introduction, John, that we should be humble, we should learn from nature. And I come to think of Gregory Bateson, who said many years ago that the major problems of the world are the result of the difference between how nature works and how people think.
Yes.
And that's a very good quote. Very, very good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also you, Anders, you also commented the new bioeconomic strategy. I think one of the most important things there that they are lifting up test beds as a kind of example of how to encourage and develop things, because test beds is actually what John is talking about. We are testing things, we are testing in systems and evaluate them and see how we can scale up instead of asking everything to be there from the beginning. So this is a way to start it. So take the Novamont example in Italy and let it go everywhere in Europe. Do you think that is possible, Anders, with your international connections to start up spots with test beds like?
I've just been reading John Fullerton's new book, Regenerative Economics.
Yeah.
And one of the points he makes is that we need a lot of experimentation. And experimentation, that's test beds. So because we don't know exactly how things are going to work, we need to test it. And I believe that is an angle that we have to push into the policy process, because I don't think most policymakers really understand it. So yes, it should be possible, but it will require a lot of work.
Yeah, I think we keep in touch, both of you, all of us three, and see what we can do. And I hope I got some input from our members to continue with this, actually, and others. So the time is ending. It's just 2 minutes left, but I want to thank both of you, and it's thanks to you, Anders, that you reintroduced John to me. I think I met John 2009 or something, but we have forgotten that. But it was, and you mentioned that John was a bit worried about how the European Union manage development of bioplastics, etc. And I'm sharing that. But we can, I think we can try to do something about it, and there's a chance with rethinking about the Hormuz situation.
And to join hands with John is, I think, fantastic, because he is a real powerhouse, a real powerhouse.
That's great.
Thank
You heard that, John.
Thank you.
So I
Thank
hope
you.
we can
Thank
have you
you.
back in this kind of
Yeah.
webinar or other in autumn. I have another guy I want to have in the webinar. It's from Vinio. They have great ideas. They are owned by AP Muller, the Maersk owners, the Maersk, and they have great ideas actually. But I will come back to that. But now the time is 11, and I will say thanks very much. Thanks to both of you for your
Thank you.
great
Thank
presentations.
you. Thank you, Magnus. Thank you, Anders. It's a pleasure to be with you and listen to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.